Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Friday, November the 12th, 2021. Let's start off with the biggest scandal that is roiling America, and that, of course, is the scandal of the judge who uttered the words, Asian food. Yes, I know, it's a pretty shocking story. So brace yourselves. Apparently, it took two men to write this drivel for USA Today. Their names are Drake Bentley and Joel Shannon. And they begin, a day after he made headlines for erupting in anger at the prosecution in Kyle Rittenhouse murder trial, Kenosha County Circuit Judge Bruce Schroeder continued to draw attention, criticism, and accusations of bias. On Thursday, the judge sparked backlash by making a quip about Asian food. And his attempt to honor veterans led the courtroom to applaud a man who appeared to be the only veteran in the room, a witness for the defense. The longest-serving current judge in Wisconsin, Schroeder previously garnered national attention and accusations of favor to the defense in late October, when he said the people shot by Rittenhouse couldn't be called victims during the trial. Barring the use of victims is a regular part of courtroom practices, but his decision to allow the same people to be called rioters, looters, and arsonists began a pattern of Rittenhouse's critics blasting the judge as biased and Rittenhouse's supporters celebrating the judge's decisions. While accusations of bias have mounted during the trial, Kyle Rittenhouse's mom said Thursday she thought the judge was very fair. Wendy Rittenhouse told Fox News Channel's Sean Hannity she had been told by locals that he doesn't allow no nonsense in his courtroom. Those comments came as Schroeder's latest controversy gained national attention. On Thursday, he attempted a joke in response to an inquiry about a lunch break. I hope the Asian food isn't on one of those boats along Long Beach Harbor, he said. Yes, and I know you're all shuddering by this point. The comment seemingly referenced the situation unfolding on the West Coast, where a record-breaking number of cargo ships have waited off the coast of California due to a backup at the ports of Los Angeles and Long Island. A situation folding on the West Coast, and these cargo ships have waited off the coast of California. Well, yes, it only has one coast, the West Coast. Again, apparently, newspapermen don't have editors anymore. But back to the horror. Critics found the joke offensive. Stanford law professor Michelle Dauber tweeted, the biased judge in the Rittenhouse trial just made a thinly veiled anti-Asian comment because all Asian food comes from China like the boats. Haha, what an idiot. Yes, I've read that verbatim. Former Vermont Governor Howard Dean, a Democrat, used the clip to criticize the judge and the judicial system that led him to preside over the trial. Quote, Schroeder has provided an example of how not to be a good judge. The selection system in Wisconsin is also badly flawed. They are elected after initial appointment, and there is no retirement age. That is why we have intemperate and unfit judges like this all over the world, unquote. Yeah, you mean like Ruth Bader Ginsburg? No retirement age for the Supreme Court of the United States of America. And the Democrats were hoping that that woman would live forever. Back to the text. In a separate incident at the start of the proceedings on Veterans Day, Schroeder asked the courtroom if anyone was a veteran. The only person who replied yes was expert witness John Black. Schroeder asked Black, what branch? Black responded, Army, sir. Okay, and I think we can give a round of applause to the people who have served our country, Schroeder replied. The judge clapped. People in the gallery also began to applaud, including a defense attorney and Rittenhouse. Recognizing veterans is not out of character for Schroeder, who wore a tie Thursday emblazoned with American flags, and whose phone ringtone, as heard in court, is God bless the USA. This man is a monster. but Schroeder risked making Black appear more credible to the jury by asking for applause, according to Stephen Wright, a professor at the University of Wisconsin School of Law. Wright thought the moment was a mistake on the judge's part. However, the issue was unlikely to be scrutinized, whatever the trial's outcome. If jurors find Rittenhouse not guilty, there's likely no appeal. If they find him guilty, Schroeder's mistake could only be seen as an aid to Rittenhouse rather than a point of argument on appeal, Wright said. While critics on social media have frequently targeted the judge, other pundits have argued the prosecution has bungled aspects of the Rittenhouse case. Jonathan Turley, Shapiro Professor of Public Interest Law at George Washington University, wrote, "Some have criticized Judge Bruce Schroeder after he enforced long-standing constitutional principles. Even without the unforced errors by the prosecution, this was always a difficult case. Wisconsin has a strong self-defense standard. After a defendant claims to have acted to repel a threat, the burden is on the prosecution to rebut that claim beyond a reasonable doubt." One wonders whether the authors of this piece, Bentley and Shannon, have ever been in a courtroom before, whether they've ever seen a trial on television before, or whether they've ever read a newspaper, because it is a commonplace that judges are like princes in their courtrooms. And judges are wont to make all manner of salty comments, certainly saltier than a joke, perhaps, or an observation about Asian food. Now, of course, not all Asian food comes from Asia, but a great deal of it does. In any event, who gives a toss? Oh my God, he used the phrase Asian food to refer to Asian food. Such level of bigotry has scarcely been encountered in a United States courtroom. No, we don't get to call people victims, especially in a case like this, in a courtroom until after the man on trial has been convicted. No, they're not victims. And as calling them rioters, looters, and arsonists, well, yes, that's what they are. They're on film. All of this, well, is on digital recordings, as you know, which raises the question of why Rittenhouse was ever charged. But he's a bad man because, as we know, he took a rifle to Kenosha, the same Kenosha where the police sat on their hands for 3 days as the city went up in flames. Apparently, the cops had decided, or their betters had decided, that no, we don't want the cops to stop our city from burning down. That wouldn't look good on the news. Also, there could be some ugly, investigations by the Department of Justice. And I'm reminded of what someone said on Twitter about this, which I thought was quite to the point. That what do you call a country in which cities are allowed to burn down with the authorities not daring to intervene? Well, what you call it is a failed state. Well, it was righteous and all that, and Joe Biden on the second day of the riots certainly thought that it was righteous because he completely prejudged the case that precipitated the riots, just letting off steam. Young people letting off steam in what were overwhelmingly peaceful protests. It would appear that several people on the left have been shocked by their recent knowledge that Kyle Rittenhouse, who is a white man, did not shoot dead black men, which points to something strange about this case, which is at the same time, the most closely followed court case in America, but it's the one that the media decided that they simply weren't going to write about before the trial began. Why would you need to write about it? Because we all know that Kyle Rittenhouse, as described by Joe Biden, is a white supremacist. And so since he's a white supremacist, he must be guilty of 2 counts of murder. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Dan, Head McNeck, Anne Brandon Smith, Steve Furman, evening from Ireland, or Era. Hello to Chogoken 666. And let's see. Enron says, I hate to say it, but I think it is more likely Kyle serves some time than that he is acquitted of all charges. Hello to Yo Mama. And to William Hicks, who says, I'd like 2 egg rolls, some white rice, and a couple packets of soy sauce, please. Hello to Palcasso 88. And Ann Run, who says a hung jury is more likely than a full acquittal. Yes, I've heard some talk about this, that the jury is likely to be made up of white cucks. And since, their betters have told them that he's a wicked man and guilty of something, he won't be acquitted because there will be, I don't know, a handful or 3 who will say, no, I mean, we got to find him guilty of something because he's the most hated man in America. And now, little Palcasso 88 and Dr. A Dead Name, who says rice baby. Dr. Dead Name likes my scowling Harridan impression. Hello to Dan. Yes, who mentions notorious RBG. Joaquin 666 says, as if there weren't enough things to keep us atomized, now where you stand on vaccines is enough to separate us in more profound ways. Anwar says, I really wish he had said Oriental food. Yes, indeed. Well, the judge has learned that lesson. Visionary Companion says, frolickers, lute players, and rose flingers riotously with the throng would have been more acceptable. Jim Smith says, cut the crap with Asian food. They're most likely talking about Chinese food. Oh, I don't know. Maybe the judge is something of an aesthete or a hipster, and he ordered a Thai food. I remember when I first learned that, you're still eating Chinese food? No, we've all moved on to Thai food, and especially pad Thai. Oh, it's that wonderful, is it? I guess it's okay. I've had Malaysian food cooked by a genuine Malaysian. Oh, that was pretty good. Let's see, Brandon Smith's, I remember on Deadwood, they got called Celestials. Never heard that one before up to that point. The things TV can teach us. Hello to Quacholango. Head McNeck says, speaking of inversion, it's safe to say that pro-American is the new anti-American. Anwar says, Requieta and his crew really torched the defense today. Requieta is awesome, says Head McNeck. Love that whole crew. And, he torched for not strongly objecting enough to certain jury instructions regarding provocation. I only watched some of it, but may watch all after KMG. Anrun says the US of A is a failed state. Chokin 666 says the planted axiom is that rioters have the right to be armed and destroy, while Kyle was provocative. Yes, legal insurrection. Everyone should read Legal Insurrection. Hello to Dionysus and more, please. This is Treasure Island, right? A night, is it? Yes. So ask Oscar Tell. It is. Don't you hate on Thai food, Kevin? I'm not hating on Thai food, Head McNeck. It just seemed kind of remarkable to me that one day there were no Thai restaurants, and then they just started popping all over every city. What the foe was that judge thinking, says Palcasso 88. Yako Raipala says the Thai food that we all suddenly got in Western countries was promoted by big budget Thai government project, their version of K-pop, anime, etc., buying cultural presence in the West. I like it, though. Let's see. Head McNeck says the defense completely crapped the bed on that provocation issue. They've really put Kyle in danger. Uh, what about Muppet Treasure Island? Asks your mama. I'll have something to say about films, Treasure Island films. Okay, where are we now? Oh, yes, let's talk about Michel Dauber. Michel Dauber is a professor of law at Stanford Law and also a professor of sociology at Stanford. And okay, so I looked it up, and your 3 years at Stanford Law will cost you well in excess of $300,000. But on the upside, you get to learn about jurisprudence from that paragon of wit, Michel Dauber. And we've seen that one already. Let's go to Steve Saylor here, his column Attackies, the demonization of core Americans. A seldom explained problem slowing the Democrats' march to a permanent one-party state is that while their electoral grand strategy is impressively opportunistic, sleazy, and dangerous to the country, Democrats don't like to think of themselves as the cunning bad guys. Therefore, they blow elections, such as last week's governor's race in Virginia, by taking their own rationalizations for their schemes at face value. Ironically, the Democrats' success at generating talking points for the press makes it hard for them to remember that their gambits are ruses rather than ethical imperatives, so they wind up taking their stances too far for their own electoral good. For instance, inviting in foreigners to vote for your party is, when you stop to think about it, a sordid and shameless way to win national elections. Hence, Democrats hardly ever think about it other than to boast of it, except when Tucker Carlson drives them into spluttering rage by mentioning what they are up to. They much prefer to think about how their enemies deserve what's coming to them. So the Democrats wind up committing own goals, like Joe Biden condemning his Hispanic Border Patrol equestrian agents for trying to maintain order when overwhelmed by 15,000 Haitians crossing the Rio Grande. Of course, that's not a smart way to flip Texas blue and thus assure themselves the White House forever, but Democrats tend to be so addicted to hate that they do stupid things like this. Because Democrats dominate the respectable media, there's seldom anybody to remind them, at least in between their occasional election setbacks, of the cynical origins of their beliefs. Granted, it's pretty shameful that Democrats try to get the rest of us to believe that importing ringers to vote for them is what America is all about, that egging on looters and murderers, as Biden did on the second day of the Kenosha riots, is justice, and that encouraging teenage girls to claim they are boys is healthy and sane. The Democrats' master plan is simple: to be the party of diversity, with diversity defined elastically as being the opposite of a core American. And who is a core American, you ask? Well, the more you have in common demographically with George Washington or Ben Franklin, the more of a core American you are, and thus the bad guy. For the nation, of course, the bad thing about diversity is that it's divisive. On the other hand, it's not 1942, so we don't desperately need unity at the moment. We can likely bump along without much cohesion for some time without anything at all bad happening. Although in the 1850s, American politicians no doubt were also asking themselves, what's the worst that could happen? That diversity is divisive is also a major internal problem for the Democrats. How can they keep their coalition of the margins from turning into a circular firing squad with, say, the fanatical Muslims and gay Jews at each other's throats? The Democrats have set off a Darwinian struggle among their coalition of the fringes to be the top dogs of diversity. At the moment, blacks and transgenders have clawed their way to the peak of the ladder, leaving hard feelings in their wake among the losers, such as lesbian feminists, who are increasingly out of fashion and perhaps slated for hormonal extermination for failing to believe that a man in a frock is a woman. Moreover, America now is the most absurd moral elite ever. Blacks are this country's perpetual problem children, and the X-Men are the most aggressively nasty. So the current dispensation is hardly a stable situation. Why are Democrats so enamored with men in dresses that the Biden administration recently proudly announced that Rachel Levine, who played linebacker on his high school football team, along with fellow four-star Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, is the first female four-star admiral of the U.S. Public Health Service. One reason is because the transgender fad snares young Americans to keep them from ever achieving what most often propels them into voting Republican: marriage. Yes, certainly the Democrats pick the most tolerant group to demonize normal Americans, but when your party controls the media, the White House, and Congress, eventually even the nicest people get tired of having themselves, their ancestors, and their children denounced as the source of all evil. Who pay? Well, as I have been pointing out for quite some years now, that intersectionality leads to the war of all against all. And we're seeing it already. And it is somewhat surprising to me to see that lesbians, who we all love lesbians, right? I mean, there's Ellen and Queen Latifah and all those other lesbians, and we all love them. Now we're supposed to hate them. How quickly it turns. How quickly it turns. You see, these lesbians, they're really men, but they don't want to admit it. Amazing. William Briggs writes, anti-white Caucasian replacement theory, CRT, is the law. Headline, bosses at one of the world's biggest investment firms, State Street, will need to get special permission to hire white men as part of new diversity drive. State Street aims to triple number of Black, Asian, and other minority senior staff. Failure to meet target by 2023 will result in executives' bonuses being lowered. The investment firm has 30 offices worldwide and employs 39,400 people. Recruiters must show that candidates have been interviewed by a diverse panel. Diverse, Briggs comments, as we all know, means non-white. For example, a panel with no whites would be counted as fully diverse. Before we get to the meat, if you have any money with State Street, get it out now while you can, because quota hiring always, absolutely always, leads to a decrease in standards. This cannot be stopped. If that firm is going to put its quota hires in any position that has to do with making clients money, clients will soon begin to make less of it. State Street will naturally see this as happening, but will be anxious to deny it. Now, we can go through example after example of this kind of thing and review instances of much worse, as with this headline, MSNBC host and panel go off on white men whining and complaining about wokeness. Shut the F up. Or we could look at this grossly obese college professor. That would be Professor Crunk, who is paid $112,000 a year by Rutgers, who says white people need to be taken out. She is at Rutgers as a direct result of quota hiring in the quota-created Department of Women's, Gender, and Sexuality Studies. All studies and the like programs were created specifically to house quota hires. Just like with State Street, the hope is that these people will do little harm. Well, that's what they thought, in the 1960s, when it first started with Black Studies Department. The feeling amongst the professors was that, this is just this sideshow. It's not important. Okay, these people want jobs. They want Gibbs. We'll give it to them. We can just ignore them. Famous last words. Yes. And let's have more about this. This is from theblaze.com. Chris Field. Longtime Democratic operative James Carville looked at the Democratic electoral massacre in Virginia last week and lamented the impact stupid wokeness had on the race. Race hustling MSNBC host Tiffany Cross and frequent guest Roland Martin. That is quite the head that he has there. Football-shaped head. As well as other members of the show's panel did on Saturday, did not appreciate Carville's take and wished that whining white men like him would shut the F up. Carville, who is considered one of the geniuses behind Bill Clinton's election and re-election, is now being demonized because he's saying, You've gone too far. It's time to let the adults in the room run things. And of course, they're not having that. Cross, who last month infamously went after Black former ESPN host Sage Steele for not being a legitimate Black voice and accused her of spewing nonsense from powerful white Americans, had Martin on to discuss the Carville PBS interview. In response to the clip, Martin declared, quote, "I think Carville should shut the F up because I'm sick of these white men whining and complaining about wokeness when you like it when Black folks and Latinos and young white voters and Asians are voting for candidates. How about this, James Carville? How about you go learn how to cut some Lincoln Project type ads for the Democratic Party?" He's saying that like it's a good thing. This did not work out well for them. He continued, "How about creating some actual memes? Where's the video this morning of the infrastructure bill? That's very meme-worthy. How about you go raise money to run those ads on OAN and Fox News and Newsmax and telling those broke white folks in those various states how the infrastructure bill is going to benefit them? I'm sorry, James, I need you to shut up and do your job and stop trying to pin it on people who are doing the work." Cross replied that she felt the same way and shared her apparent resentment of white people, noting that when people of color are the majority and whites are the minority, it's going to be uncomfortable for a lot of people. This is what the kids are calling saying the quiet part loud. We're comfortable making people uncomfortable, Cross added. It's never occurred to this person that things could possibly be made uncomfortable to her. No, because she is one of the chosen ones, and she will always remain one of the chosen ones. Okay, let's go on to that, that topic, which just won't go away. This is from Bloomberg. As the latest COVID-19 wave flares up, countries are starting to take a tougher stance towards those who haven't been vaccinated. You remember what? Last year, it was all, take that, virus. We're not afraid of you, virus. We're going to show you what's what. Now they're blaming the victims. Now they're blaming the victims. From sending those without shots into lockdown to forcing them to pay their own COVID medical bills, here are some of the steps being taken to try to encourage more people to get immunized. Encourage? That's not the word that I would use, Ann Poliak. How about bully, terrorize? Those would be better words. Lockdown in Austria, medical bills in Singapore, cash in Lithuania. Okay. Mandate in U.S., Estonia firings, forced leave in Ukraine. And the next one up is, this is more significant than it might appear. This is from Melissa Healy at the Los Angeles Times. Since the earliest days of the pandemic, there has been one collective goal for bringing it to an end, achieving herd immunity. That's when so many people are immune to a virus that it runs out of potential hosts to infect, causing an outbreak to sputter out. Many Americans embrace the novel farmyard phrase, and with it, the projection that once 70 to 80% or 85% of the population was vaccinated against COVID-19, the virus would go away and the pandemic would be over. Now the herd is restless. And experts at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention have set aside herd immunity as a national goal. The prospects for meeting a clear herd immunity target are very complicated, said Dr. Jefferson Jones, a medical officer on the CDC's COVID-19 epidemiology task force, thinking that we'll be able to achieve some kind of threshold where there'll be no more transmissions of infections may not be possible, he acknowledged last week. Golly. Vaccines have been quite effective at preventing cases of COVID-19 that lead to severe illness and death, but none has proved reliable at blocking transmission of the virus, Jones noted. This was the sort of thing, so Jones of the CDC, reported by the Los Angeles Times and reprinted by MSN, is now saying the sort of things that one would get one banned from Twitter a month ago from saying, or get one banned from YouTube for saying, oh, I don't know, yesterday. But as always, believe the science. The experts are always right. And if the experts are saying something diametrically opposite to what they said a year ago, a month ago, or a week ago, or yesterday, that's how science works. Get with the program, people. The result is, oh man, here is the money graph. The result is that even if vaccination were universal, the coronavirus would probably continue to spread. Now, that should not be considered in any way a criticism of the vax, okay? No, that would be the wrong lesson to take. We would discourage thinking in terms of a strict goal, he said. To Dr. Oliver Brooks, a member of the CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, it was a sobering new message with potentially worrisome effects. With just 58.5% of all Americans fully vaccinated, we do need to increase the uptake of COVID-19 shots, said Brooks, chief medical officer of Watts Healthcare in Los Angeles. Unfortunately, he said, Jones's unexpected admission, quote, almost makes you less motivated to get more people vaccinated, unquote. Golly, I wonder what that might be. It's a science communication problem, said Dr. John Brooks, chief medical officer for the CDC's COVID-19 response. We said, based on our experience with other diseases, that when you get up to 70 to 80%, you often get herd immunity, he said. But the SARS-CoV-2 virus didn't get the memo. It has lots of tricks up its sleeve. Ooh, it's so wily and devious. And it's repeatedly challenged us. It's impossible to predict what herd immunity will be in a new pathogen until you reach herd immunity. The CDC's new approach will reflect this uncertainty. Instead of specifying a vaccination target that promises an end to the pandemic, you get the impression that the pandemic's going to last forever. Public health officials hope to redefine success in terms of new infections and deaths, and they'll surmise that herd immunity has been achieved when both remain low for a sustained period. We want clean, easy answers, and sometimes they exist, John Brooks said, but on this one, we're still learning. Now, you will wait, and you will wait in vain for all of these people at the CDC to apologize, to get down on their hands and knees and beg forgiveness for what they have said, what they have beaten us over the head with. No, it's just science evolving. Oh, yes, everyone, we get the levels of vaccination up, and then people can go back to their normal lives. Well, apparently we're never going back to what used to be normal. And since that's the science, which is constantly evolving, there's no point in disputing it. It is, the science tells us things. And one of the things it tells us loud and long is that you should treat every utterance from Dr. Anthony Fauci as if it is the word of God. And it's right that we think that. Let's see. This is from Anakin Tapp at CNN Business. A record number of Americans quit their jobs in September. 4.4 Americans quit their jobs in September as the sheer volume of available jobs is empowering workers to have their pick. Workers are quitting in search of better pay or better jobs, representing a fundamental shift in America's labor market. Labor now has the initiative, says Joseph Brusuelas, chief economist at RSM US. The nation had 10.4 million open jobs that month as the worker shortage crisis continues. It was a modest decrease from the 10.6 million open jobs in August. The Delta variant is still visible in the September JOLTS report, said Nick Bunker, director of economic research at the Indeed Hiring Lab. Yeah, there's something else going on here. During the pandemic, millions of workers have dropped out of the labor force. For some, care responsibilities at home prevent them from going back to work, while for others the risk of contracting the virus is still too high. These factors particularly affected women. As of October, the number of women not in the labor force was nearly 3 million people higher than before COVID. But even if all these women went back to work, America would still have additional jobs to fill. There's always the possibility that millions of American women have decided that they would rather stay home to look after their children. I know it's a horrifying thought, but it could be happening. So we had some unpleasantness, several instances of unpleasantness in Remembrance Day ceremonies in Canada yesterday. This is from CTV News of Vancouver, Andrew Weichel. A day of somber reflection and gratitude for Canada's war veterans was marred by individuals spreading anti-vaccination messages in at least 3 BC cities on Thursday. That includes Kamloops, where lawyer Jay Mitchie brought his 2 young daughters to the Riverside Park cenotaph for what he expected would be a typical Remembrance Day ceremony. But Mitchie told CTV News the park looked different than previous years. There was no honor guard, and the bagpipes seemed to blare from pre-recorded audio. A young man then got up to recite In Flanders Fields before reading a poem of his own. The poem was about remembering our forefathers who fought for our freedoms. He put an emphasis on freedom, said Mitchie, who was a partner at Jensen Law. And then I'm like, oh my God, here we go. The speaker started condemning vaccine mandates and government propaganda being forced down our throats, according to Mitchie, who said some in the crowd immediately began jeering. A middle-aged man who identified himself as a veteran interrupted the poem, but Mitchie said even he appeared to have some sort of agenda and was dropping F-bombs into the microphone. I'm thinking I need to get my girls out of here, said Mitchie, whose children are only 4 and 6. And so apparently there were other disturbances, but this story does not mention perhaps the most significant disturbance. And could that be an accident? I wonder. This is from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. A war memorial in Canada honoring the lives of fallen soldiers was defaced with graffiti that said, "The real heroes are the vaccinated." And this is very big graffiti. I would reckon it's probably about 10 feet long. And vaccinated is underlined, an exclamation point. No, this isn't the Babylon Bee. The message was sprayed on the Cranbrook Cenotaph in Cranbrook, BC, before the town celebrated its veterans for Remembrance Day Thursday. Police were notified of the graffiti at 7 a.m. and city workers were able to scrub it off in time for an event later that day. As a community, we are beyond disappointed by the disrespectful actions of those responsible for defacing such an important monument and such an important day for all Canadians, the city of Cranbrook posted on Facebook. Police said they are actively investigating and will be collecting security video from nearby buildings in the hopes they recorded the vandal. I've been to Cranbrook. I had to go to Cranbrook because there's an airport there, unlike in Creston, where I found myself living for 6 months. What was it, 2 years ago? I would reckon Cranbrook could probably consider to be one of the most small C conservative towns in Canada. Here's a story from Carissa Wilson at CTV News, and I wonder whether the Canadian media has any curiosity left. One of the reasons I started my old podcast with Kevin Steele is because I've been a news junkie since I was like 6 years old, and I would read these stories time and again. There are obvious questions that aren't being asked in this story, let alone being answered. Why? Well, the story is Ontario ICU occupancy could hit 200 patients in January as COVID-19 cases rise, modeling suggests. Okay, so what's the unasked question here? And it's the same as it's happened in Alberta. As we learned from JJ McCullough, who's a Canadian from Vancouver, who for some reason regularly has columns printed in the Washington Post, that the province of Alberta has roughly the same population as the state of Alabama. And Alabama has almost 3 times as many ICU beds as Alberta. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Well, actually, it's efficiency. Since we have socialized medicine here, costs must be kept down. Healthcare must be rationed. Canadians will deny that healthcare is rationed, but try going into a emergency room on a Friday or Saturday night. Or try, waiting for a so-called non-essential operation and see how long that takes. Now, as it turns out, the province of Ontario has 14.8 million people, and yet the prospect that ICU occupancy could hit 200 is apparently some sort of catastrophe. Ontario needs more ICU beds. Oh, yes, but many of them will be empty. Yeah, well, we can afford to build in some inefficiency into the system. It's the inefficiency that allows the system not to be overwhelmed. But how many ICU beds does Ontario have? Is this mentioned in the story? Okay, apparently in a possible scenario, we could hit 250. How many? How many are there? Because you would think if I were an editor and I signed a story about this, you're going to mention how many ICU beds Ontario has. No, we're not going to mention that in a story, because what possible use would that information be? Now, to me, if I were an editor, this story would be completely redone. Why does Ontario only have X number of ICU beds? Or alternatively, how can it be that the possibility of 200 or 250 ICU beds being filled in a province of 14.8 million is some sort of, oh my God, catastrophe? Those are the obvious questions to ask, but the reporters and the editors at our news organs in Canada are apparently no longer capable of asking questions which should be obvious. And let's go to a certain Substack written by a man, his initials are AB, Worldwide Vaccine Failure. From Singapore to the Netherlands to Iceland to Vermont, and coming soon to the entire northern half of the United States. And as we've seen, we're almost there in the province of Ontario. Latest figures show that about 40% of the most recent COVID-19 infections are among the vaccinated. And this number has gone from like here, and it's going like this. AB says this is not how it was supposed to go. Deaths hitting new highs in Singapore. 85% of the population fully vaccinated, not adults, the entire population. A new lockdown in the Netherlands, 70% fully vaccinated. And in Iceland, 76% fully vaccinated. As for Vermont, the most vaccinated American state, 71% fully vaccinated, smashes highs, 4 cases. Virus going to virus. AB comments. Well, we've seen from the CDC that they have thrown in the towel on the idea that ever higher vaccination levels are going to result in ever lower cases. They're done with that. But by all means, you should be fully vaccinated, and a booster probably, because again, that is science. Science is never wrong, except when, it evolves. It was right then and it's right now. That's the way, we should look at it. Let's go to Jim Kunstler's column, which is called The Recognition. The climate change agitation is based on the central grandiose fallacy of our wobbling technocratic age, the idea that if you can measure enough stuff, you can control it. The master wish in this case is what exactly? To control the weather, which we might define as the day-to-day expression of the planet's climate. That ain't going to happen. In case you haven't noticed, the business model of industrial civilization is already broken and many of its dazzling tricks with it. And anyway, the Earth's climate is forever and always changing, as is the adaptive response to it by human populations over the centuries, sometimes slowly and sometimes fast. So the net result of this year's Glasgow Climate Summit is to pledge gobs of money from the rich nations to protect the poor nations while mandating the reduction of oil, natural gas, and coal in all nations, i.e. the global economy. Apropos of those so-called rich nations, guess what? All of our modern money rests on promises to deliver future volumes of energy and products of value made from it, and those promises are without basis in reality. So the money itself is increasingly worthless. Thus, the cost of getting that future energy exceeds the promises embedded in the money based on the energy. How's that for a paradox? We're the proverbial snake eating its own tail, and now we've bitten off more than we can swallow. We're going to use less energy, whether Klaus Schwab and the Persian cat in his lab likes it or not, because our money is increasingly no good, which translates into a general loss of mojo for this round of civilization. The massive matrix of mutually self-reinforcing activities is seizing up the mining, making, harvesting, and transport of stuff. That's exactly what the supply chain melodrama is about. Of course, the Glasgow summit did allow a bunch of people to feel self-important, to bethink themselves morally superior, which is the status currency of our time, the brownie point having more actual value than the dollar these days. It certifies the good people and validates the persecution of the bad people, which is the central political drama of our time. The reward is power for its own sake, which is, let's face it, the essence of evil. The collapse of the global economy is underway and working itself out as it will, and the fear associated with that epic loss of resources, goods, comforts, and conveniences is driving Western civ batshit crazy. Hence the lunacies around the COVID-19 virus, another measure and control mania. Another interesting paradox in this panorama of mind effery is that the self-designated good people have behaved with uniform bad faith and dishonesty throughout the long crisis, at least from Russiagate through the current crusade. And I can't finish that. And that is what will change the game probably soon. It happens that the leadership of the so-called good people includes most of the figures in authority over the whole country. Those public health officials like Dr. Fauci, the hospital directors who outlawed early treatment protocols, the pharma executives who buried their failed drug trials, the scientific journal publishers who killed reports that don't support the narrative, the news media editors and producers who can't stop spinning lies, the social media totalitarian censors and cancelers, the tyrant mayors of New York, San Francisco, and Los Angeles, the blue state governors who destroyed small business with lockdowns and passports, the woked up state and federal bureaucrats ever preoccupied with covering their asses, the skulking managers behind the ectoplasmic President Joe Biden and their handmaidens in Congress, that satanic host of coercion meisters, inquisitors, corporate despots, reputational executioners, money grubbers, political whores, and credentialed sadists trying to run your life. They're headed for a fall. They will fall because dishonesty undermines the entire scaffold of their so-called narrative. All that's required is for a crucial truth to assert itself unequivocally in the zeitgeist for the whole armature to fold. For instance, the truth that the vaccines are killing and maiming a lot of people, or the truth that firing unvaxxed people from their jobs will drive them to hardship and revolt, even while it destroys the critical services that all people, good or bad, depend on, from the EMTs to the army. Or the truth that the crashing economy will disorder all the touchstones of daily life and require us to make big changes to remain civilized. That moment of recognition of how things have gone and where things are going is here. We're in it. Yeats's gyre has widened. We're close to escape velocity, and then maybe we will begin again walking in sunlight rather than darkness. I've mentioned quite a few times on this live stream that when Gorbachev became chairman of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union in 1985, he announced perestroika, which was, more efficiency, and glasnost, which was openness. Now, the openness led to a situation of the Soviet Union itself being demonized from its very existence, which very quickly led to an epiphany. Why should anyone suffer at all? Why should anyone sacrifice for a polity which has been evil since its inception? And they didn't. 6 years after Gorbachev took power, the Soviet Union collapsed and was dissolved. Donald Trump became president in 2017. And the elite, which had lost the White House, the elite decided to declare war on the American people. How dare they vote for this man? Particularly guilty were white women, who are the worst people on earth. Sure, they don't have toxic masculinity, but they shouldn't have voted for Trump. So perhaps that makes them even worse than white men. So we're what? We're 4 years into this, almost 5 years into this. It took 6 years for the Soviet Union to collapse after the very basis of its legitimacy was undermined. How long can this continue to go on for in the United States? And I don't want to speak about the United States here. Let's talk about Haiti. This is from the Wall Street Journal. Juan Montes. Haiti is sliding deeper into chaos as mass kidnappings escalate and gangs become powerful enough to blackmail the government and choke the impoverished nation's struggling economy. Nearly a month after a group of 17 American and Canadian missionaries and their families were abducted in Haiti, negotiations to free the hostages drag on. The extended captivity of the missionaries, a group that includes an infant and 4 other children, has added to a growing sense of anarchy in the country of 11 million. On Wednesday, armed men stopped a bus carrying 52 people near the capital, killed a police officer traveling on board, and held an undetermined number of people hostage, according to Mehu Chanju, the head of Haiti's Association of Owners and Drivers. He later said the hostages were released on Thursday after being held overnight. The U.S. State Department is urging Americans in Haiti to leave now on commercial flights, saying the U.S. might not be able to help them depart if commercial flights become unavailable. Late last week, it warned that if the security situation in the country was deteriorating, kidnapping is widespread and victims regularly include U.S. citizens. Gangs control an estimated half the capital and surrounding areas, according to security analysts and local human rights groups. They are increasingly flaunting their power in the face of a weak government hobbled by the July assassination of President Jovenel Moïse. Prime Minister Ariel Henry is leading a caretaker government. Well, okay, this is my plan for Haiti. Cordon sanitaire is a French phrase, which is appropriate. Haiti is a failed state. It has always been a failed state. It brings misery to its citizens, but it brings misery to everyone around it. I suppose we're going to be told, we have to be humanitarian, we have to be Christian, and take even more Haitian immigrants into the United States and Canada. North Montreal is effectively a Haitian city now. They had a race riot a decade ago. It was Haitians, and the media decided not to admit that until at least 3 days after the riots started. To the extent that we take in more people from Haiti, our countries will become more Haitian. And the Haitians are incapable of doing anything in their own interests. Cordon sanitaire. That is the only sensible response. After all, this is a nation which at its inception consecrated itself to the devil. Interesting piece in First Things magazine about Sigmund Freud. I'd always rather assumed that Sigmund Freud had been written off as a rather obvious fraud quite some time ago. But no, apparently not. Freud certainly said some interesting things about the human condition. I think some of them were true, most of them false. But there's a piece here by Sam Criss called "It's Not All in Your Head." This is a rather astounding story. Emma Eckstein was a bleeder. She liked to bleed. She wanted to empty herself out into the world. She was sick and dying because that was what she desired. This isn't my interpretation. It's the analysis offered by her doctor, one Sigmund Freud. Emma was one of Freud's first patients, but she was also his student. And for a while, she was the first practicing female psychoanalyst. The Ecksteins were a talented family. Emma's brother, Gustav, was a left-wing intellectual. Trotsky would describe him as one of the noblest figures in the international family of socialism. Another brother, Frederick, was a theosophist. He studied music with Anton Bruckner and spent his own time delving into the secrets of the Knights Templar and learning jiu-jitsu. A sister, Teresa, was a leading feminist in 1919. She was just one of a few women in Austria's first freely elected parliament, but Emma was different. Her world, the world of wealthy Jews in Vienna at the end of the 19th century, might have been the most intellectually fecund environment in human history, but Emma shrank away. She was constantly tired. Her body hurt. Sometimes she had difficulty walking or even getting up off the couch. She had terrible menstrual pains, and they came with great gouts of blood. Freud's diagnosis was hysteria. There was nothing medically wrong with her. The problem was in her mind. Patients with hysteria might spasm or freeze up. They would make bizarre stereotype movements or find themselves incapable of getting out of bed. Sometimes they would suffer intense specific pains jumping around their bodies for which there was no known physical cause. Still, there might be a physical solution. At the time, Freud was influenced by Wilhelm Fliess, a quack doctor who had identified a hidden connection between the sexual organs and the cavities of the nose. In 1896, Freud handed Emma over to Fliess, who elected to remove one of the turbinate bones inside her nose. The operation seemed to be a success, but Emma wouldn't stop bleeding. Constant hemorrhages and an endless stream of foul-smelling discharge pouring out of her nose. For Freud, this was just another confirmation of his theories. He wrote in a letter to Fliess, quote, "I know only that she bled out of longing. She had always been a bleeder when cutting herself, and in similar circumstances as a child, she suffered from severe nosebleeds. During the years when she was not yet menstruating, she had headaches, which were interpreted to her as malingering and which in truth had been generated by suggestion. For this reason, she joyously welcomed her severe menstrual bleeding as proof that her illness was genuine. She experienced this as the realization of an old wish to be loved in her illness, and in spite of the danger during the succeeding hours, she felt happy as never before. She became restless during the night because of an unconscious wish to entice me to go there, and since I did not come during the night, she renewed the bleedings as an unfailing means of rearousing my affection. She bled spontaneously 3 times, and each bleeding lasted 4 days, which must have some significance," unquote. But despite Freud's attempt to work through his patient's hidden desires for him, the bleeding didn't stop. Eventually, he called in another doctor to take a look at Emma's nose. Poking around inside her nostrils, the doctor found something like a thread. He tugged at it, and then before either one of us had the time to think, at least half a meter of gauze had been removed from the cavity. The next moment came a flood of blood. The patient turned white, her eyes bulged, and she had no pulse. During the first operation, Fliess had accidentally left a long strip of surgical gauze inside Emma's skull. The flesh around it had rotted. That was the source of the stinking discharge. Freud had to leave the room when the gauze came out. He famously couldn't stand the sight of blood. When he returned, Emma was weak but alive. "So," she said, looking at the queasy, shaken doctor, "this is the strong sex." Freud understood that he had made a catastrophic mistake. He had all of his letters from Fliess burned. His own side of the correspondence molded away for nearly a century until the letters were finally rediscovered in the mid-1980s. And their publication set off a storm that still hasn't died down. Golly, I wonder why. And, oh yes, Do you know that President Joe Biden used the word Negro recently? Again, it's just one shocking story after another. This is from Newsweek, Isabel Van Bruggen. Videos circulating on social media of President Joe Biden calling Satchel Paige the Great Negro during a Veterans Day speech Thursday may have been viewed more than 4.5 million times. Biden, during a speech at Arlington National Cemetery this week, said that he had, quote, adopted the attitude of the Great Negro at the time, pitcher in the Negro Leagues, who went on to become a great pitcher in the pros in Major League Baseball after Jackie Robinson, unquote. His name was Satchel Paige, the president recalled. Again, I talked about this a couple of weeks. I don't want to diminish Satchel Paige. The problem was he cannot be called a great pitcher in the pros because he wasn't given the opportunity to pitch during his prime. It's that simple. Baseball legend Paige, who passed away in June 1982, kicked off his professional career in the Negro Leagues, and Negro Leagues have scare quotes around them. They were called the Negro Leagues, but I guess Newsweek doesn't want to get into trouble for using the word Negro without scare quotes around it because, you know, it is Spanish for black, but it's too problematic. Yes, he pitched in the Negro Leagues in the 1920s before joining Major League Baseball later on in his professional career in the 1940s. So this was caught. This was caught on a recording, which has been viewed many, many times. So what's the proper response to this? The proper response is Joe Biden didn't say that. Okay. So what if he had said it? Is the world going to come to an end? This is from Mediaite, Tommy Christopher. Conservative critics falsely claimed that President Joe Biden referred to legendary pitcher Satchel Paige as a Negro during a Veterans Day speech barely more than a week after pulling the same bit on Biden and Pope Francis. Variations on the same claim spread like wildfire among verified conservative Twitter users Thursday that the president had referred to the late Hall of Famer as the Great Negro at the time, some even including a clip that plainly reveals the falsehood of the attack. Well, I've read you a verbatim quotation. It is not a false attack. No. But you see, they've gotten very Straussian here with regard to Joe Biden. It's not what he said. It's what I know because, you know, I have the gnosis, what he meant. That's what's important. They just, doubling down on this is only hurting Biden and is only hurting themselves. They'd just be best to cut their losses. Okay, Joe Biden's an old man and occasionally he slips up. Why not go with that? It's the truth. And maybe Joe Biden, you know, he remembers when black people in the United States were called Negroes, and this was not considered pejorative. This is from Spencer Brown at Town Hall. As Town Hall highlighted on Twitter, Biden in the course of a story tried to tell an anecdote about Satchel Paige in which Biden referred to him as the Great Negro at the time. There it is on video for perpetuity. Biden making another gaffe. Nevertheless, the folks at Mediaite decided to pretend we didn't see and hear what we did, in fact, see and hear. No, Joe Biden did not refer to Satchel Paige as a Negro during Veterans Day speech. Mediaite claimed, silly Americans, you didn't hear what you just heard. We know what he meant to say. I'm just wondering, you know, now that we know that this is a demonized word, completely demonized, I see that there was a record label, and I bought records myself. It was a hipster. It was a hipster British label, and it was called Blanco y Negro. And Dinosaur Jr. was on it, Queen and Mary, the Jesus and Mary chain, Eddie Reader, Bananarama. Elizabeth Fraser of the Cocteau Twins, But let's pretend that never happened. As mentioned previously, Negro is simply Spanish for black. So black people in the United States were called Negroes. Then they were called coloreds or colored people. I know the NAACP doesn't like to talk about this because the NAACP, like NARAL, doesn't stand for anything. But of course, it stood for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. So then during the 1960s, black people started to be called black or Afro-American. We were instructed that they were to be called Afro-American. That never really caught on. Eventually, it became African American, although the term black is still used. But strangely enough, the term colored people has come back as people of color. The first one is grossly offensive. The second isn't. Got it? It's all so silly. I understand, that Negro was probably abandoned because you can corrupt the word to make an infamous slur. Well, you can corrupt or add to the word black to make an infamous slur as well. But all this, and I'm sure that many members of Conservatism Inc., oh yeah, libs are the real racists. Joe Biden meant nothing nasty in using the word Negro. Can we all just calm down? It reminds me of the shock horror scandal just before the 2019 Canadian federal election, when it was it was printed with pictures that Justin Trudeau had many times engaged in blackface or brownface, as they called it. Well, Justin Trudeau was and is a drama kid who loves dressing up, who loves LARPing. And apparently putting dark makeup on your face now means that you're akin to the Nazis or something like that. No, it's not significant. Far more significant was when Trudeau made his state visit to India with his wife and his children. And he was dressed up like a Maharaja in India. And his wife was dressed up like the wife of a Maharaja. And his children like little Maharajas. This was offensive. This was grossly offensive. I saw this and I thought, if he went to France, would he wear an artist smock and a beret sort of tilted at the side? And would he be chewing on an onion, saying honky, 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 honk? That bit comes from Alan Partridge, or the description of the French. Anyway, if he went on a state visit to Mexico, would he dress up like Pancho Villa? You wear a business suit. That's really simple, and it's easy to remember. Yeah. Oh, yes. This is from Lucas Nolan at Breitbart. Microsoft's recent Ignite conference provided insight into the future of woke capitalism as presenters apologized for working in an office that is built on land previously controlled by Native Americans and introduced themselves by describing not only their pronouns, but their race and physical appearance. Hello, and welcome to Microsoft's Ignite. We've got a big day ahead, lots in store for you, said the host of Microsoft's event, at which the company showcased its various new products and features. The host continued, first, we want to acknowledge that the land where the Microsoft office is situated was traditionally occupied by the Sammamish, the Duwamish, the Snoqualmie, the Squamish, the Muckleshoot, the Snohomish, the Tulalip, and other Coast Salish people since time immemorial. Got it. If you really feel that strongly, Microsoft, that you're squatting on foreign land, why don't you hand over your land and the buildings, on top of it to these tribes? Of course, they'd probably go to war with each other. How could, one plot of land be occupied by 9 different Indian tribes? Apparently, they all laid claim to the same parcel of land, which suggests turmoil or even warfare. Does it not? In another clip, the presentation hosts begin by introducing themselves not only by their pronouns, but physically describing their race and how they look. I'm a Caucasian woman with long blonde hair, and I go by she, her. I'm a product marketing lead here at Microsoft and co-host of the podcast Security Unlocked with this guy. Gesturing to the man beside her, he responds, I'm a Caucasian man with glasses and a beard. I go by he, him, and I'm a security evangelist here at Microsoft. I just imagine, meeting this fellow, at a party somewhere else. So what do you do for a living? Oh, you work for Microsoft. What do you do there? Security evangelist? You can't be serious. Security evangelist? That is cringe, dude. You might want to look into that. But the excuse was given. Oh, apparently there's blind people. Okay. And? Oh, I see. So these are Caucasian people. So I'm going to consider what they have to say based on that. And if you bring in any, black people or Asian people or Hispanic people, I will consider what they have to say based on their skin color. Is that really the message that Microsoft wants to put out to the world? I don't know. Maybe I've got this wrong. Maybe that's a good thing now. It's not on my scad here, but today is the first day of Britney Spears' emancipation. And so we can count down the days until she is, penniless and or institutionalized or dead. Poor Britney Spears, the woman has suffered the tortures of the damned. She's a sacrifice to the devil mouse. She's not very talented. She was never very good looking. She's been, for years, she was forced to perform like an animatronic creature on a stage in Las Vegas, pretending to sing her songs. We don't really know how much she ever sang on her songs. Luckily, she had, talented Swedes and others to write material for her. Hit Me Baby One More Time. That's outstanding song. You should listen to the Fountains of Wayne's version if you haven't heard it. She was packaged up as jailbait, sexy Catholic schoolgirl outfit. And of course, what was it? Jive Records, which I think is part of BMG. They manufactured her. They seeded her. These tapes, cassette tapes were handed out many, so that when she arrived, as if we'd known her. Oh, and, photographs and, oh, look, there she is doing her sexy Catholic routine. It's a very, very sad story. She went crazy years and years ago. It would have been better off if she'd stayed in Louisiana. Of course, it would have been better off as well for her sister. If she had stayed similarly in Louisiana, perhaps Dan Schneider would have been terribly disappointed if that had happened. Okay. I don't really want to talk about Belarus. Maybe just a little bit here. This is from Elizabeth Bra, who's a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Belarus's weaponized migrants offer a primer on gray zone warfare. Western governments would do well to study Minsk's actions and prepare their populations to be on guard. Let me look here. Let me look and see whether I see Britain. Do I see Britain here? No. Because why don't we talk about the migrants coming over from Calais, and they're invading the country, and nobody's doing anything to stop it. Why don't we talk about the migrants invading the Mediterranean countries? Why don't we talk about the migrants from Mexico, primarily now from Central America, invading the United States of America? No, see, there's no Cold War aspect to this because the war against the Soviet Union, now Russia, never ended, according to the AEI and other warmongers. And, Politico is quite upset at what's going on in Syria. Biden isn't stopping Assad's comeback, says Alexander Ward, and Quint Forgy. Man, that is quite the name. Syrian President Bashar Assad, normally called al-Assad, is clawing his way back from global pariah status, and the United States is struggling to stop his rehabilitation. On Tuesday, the United Arab Emirates Foreign Minister, Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed Al Nahyan, met with Assad in Damascus. Oh, dear. Oh, dear. Multiple current and former U.S. officials say a key reason for this rapprochement, apart from the desire to counter Iran, is that the Biden administration isn't discouraging Arab partners from re-engaging with Assad. Oh, none of them have been told not to. Speak with Assad by senior American officials. James Jeffrey, the Trump administration's special representative for Syria, said in an interview. President Joe Biden's team firmly denies this. Well, I'll make it simple for you, okay? The reason that Assad is so hated by the elite, by the experts, by the neocons, is because he tolerates Christianity. It's that simple. It really is that simple. Because Assad belongs to a heretical sect of Islam that most Muslims do not believe to be Islam at all. And Assad, and particularly his wife, have made it known that they are pleased to have Christians in Syria. Christianity was on the verge of being extirpated from Syria before the Russians intervened. And once again, in any dispute between Muslims and Christians, the United States State Department will always choose Muslims. Always. And let's see here. There's a piece I'm not going to talk about today. It's a long post on Scott Laughlin.wordpress.com. Laughlin on Science, America Against America, the Chinese de Tocqueville, which is about a fellow called Wan Huning, which is really fascinating stuff. Perhaps I'll get to it next week. And, yes, in latest Houston news, this is from the U.S. Sun. Drake went to a strip club party a day after tragedy as dancers seen thanking Star and counting cash. Drake went to a strip club with his crew for a private party a day after the deadly Astroworld disaster, which saw 9 killed and around 100 injured. In deleted posts seen by the Sun, dancers are filmed surrounded by cash at Area 29 in Houston, which was set to host the official after party for Travis Scott's event, and the club thanked Drake personally for attending on Saturday. And there's a picture here of what appear to be hundreds or thousands of dollar bills which have been thrown onto the stage. The rapper and his crew are believed to have been staying at the 5-star Post Oak Hotel, where Scott and pregnant girlfriend Kylie Jenner also had been spotted before the festival. Apparently, the Big Mama has ruled that the Kardashians, and the Jenners can only have sex with black men. Well, there seems to be something of an exception for Khloe. And demonology. This is from Jack Greenberg at the Daily Caller. Exorcists from the Catholic Church and demonology experts broke down for the Daily Caller the possible demonic activity at Travis Scott's Astroworld Festival that left 8 dead and hundreds injured. In the aftermath of last Friday's tragic Astroworld Festival, social media users on Twitter and TikTok shared videos and theories speculating that the concert from hell resulted from demonic activity. Social media users stressed the eeriness of the Astroworld promotional poster, which showed people walking through a portal and encouraged festival attendees to, quote, open your eyes to a whole new universe, unquote. One of Travis Scott's signature taglines, see you on the other side, was also on the poster. Other users were quick to point out what appears to be a rendering of Travis Scott as a demon on an album cover for a song he debuted at the concert. The imagery Travis Scott projects, whether he does it for commercial reasons or intentionally, certainly projects satanic imagery and satanic practice, no question, Father John Shada, an exorcist at the Catholic Diocese of Harrisburg in Pennsylvania, said. Father Shada said it's possible Travis Scott summoned demons, but it's pure speculation. Even if he summoned demons unwillingly, he opened a door and they just took advantage of it. The Harrisburg exorcist also pointed to reports that some festival attendees were needle spiked with opioids such as ketamine and fentanyl. Whoever was going around and sticking needles into people was definitely under demonic influence, maybe even possessed, the priest told the Daily Caller. And yes, I'm looking at a tweet here, and there is that very satanic-looking skull of Travis Scott, the portal to enter Astroworld, which has been pointed out by many, bears a very strong resemblance to a famous picture by Hieronymus Bosch. This is from Philip at Philip Likes TV. Travis Scott sold his soul to the devil. Astroworld was a blood sacrifice. He took 8 innocent lives, it's up to 9 now, to pledge his allegiance to the occult elite. He didn't do it on purpose. So why is he singing as they carry off a dead body then? And other exorcists are brought in to comment on this. And they say similar things to what the first one did. Jim Jimena Canales, professor at University of Illinois Graduate School, an award-winning author of Bedeviled, said that as we progress and adopt new technologies and even create new music and new concerts, the general sense of the demonic just doesn't disappear. Canales explained that absolutely Travis Scott's brand and music encourages a belief in the supernatural, which is part and parcel of rock, like Marilyn Manson, who is a devil worshiper. I could mention Jimmy Page in this respect, who went so far as to buy Aleister Crowley's house. Yes. And this, as many people, fans of Led Zeppelin and others, have ascribed the various tragedies that afflicted Led Zeppelin to Page's seemingly fanatical interest in the occult. Canales said demonology sells and spreads because aspects of the demonic are naturally attractive, which have to do with knowing secret knowledge and not following the rules and authority, instead pursuing temptation and deep desires. In my research, I was surprised that even scientists are very tempted to explore what is perceived as demonic and monstrous, like manipulating uranium or viruses, because there is a sense of power that comes with that. Now, more on this. There's a site called vigilanttcitizen.com. Something extremely dark happened at Travis Scott's deadly Astroworld Festival. It's described as a crescendo of dark imagery, described by some as knocking on the gates of hell. Now, this has been described as a conspiratorial website, but when we are dealing with Hollywood and the music industry, I don't know that the usual rules regarding what is considered was dismissed as a conspiracy apply. There are many such stories, such as the next one on the web. This one is 4 years ago. Satanic symbolism and rap music is rap the devil's music. And of course, we're shown artwork from Iron Maiden and Metallica. Yes. Metal has long been associated with demonology. Of course, going back to what the band called Black Sabbath. Now, do I believe that rap is truly the devil's music? No, I don't. It all depends on the messenger and the message being conveyed. That isn't to say there aren't many questionable things in rap music. I should point out that this is by CAJNC@RMR, respectmyreligion.com. Without sounding too preachy, the Bible says two things. First, you shall have no other gods before me. Second, you shall not make yourself for a carved image or anything that exists in the heavens. One of the rap's biggest titans is a violator of this commandment. Jay-Z has a few nicknames. He goes by Mr. Carter and Jigga are a couple, but Hove is another he's famously known for. Of course, Hove is a play on the word Jehovah, which means God in Hebrew. Not only is it worshiping of Satan that qualifies as satanic, is the worship of oneself to become a god. Jay-Z has referred to himself as the god of rap on numerous occasions. Ja Rule is another artist whose name has an alternate meaning for good, that being Jah. When the two are combined, the translation is God's rule. On his artwork for The Last Temptation, he is seen with two Jesus peace chains across his back. He has explained that one of the chains is to represent God and the other is to represent himself. He also has two crosses on his back, one that is shining, one that is burning. Maybe this is symbolic of the righteous God and a darker God he believes to be himself. Then we have Atlanta rapper Asa Babi. I don't want to look at this guy's picture anymore because it is scaring me. Lil Uzi Vert, or Ver, I don't know. And The Weeknd. The speculation of the Toronto megastar's beliefs and imagery is multi-layered in the analysis of his videos. Can't Feel My Face, Tell Your Friends, and The Hills. They tell the story about meeting a figure holding an apple, a reference to Lucifer in the Garden of Eden. Can't Feel My Face is where he is introduced. A struggling The Weeknd is shown at a club performing, and as he begins, everyone is disinterested or uninterested until the figure believed to be the devil literally sets The Weeknd on fire and everyone begins to cheer for him. This is representative of a deal being made with the devil to jumpstart his career. And it continues in that vein. And then, of course, closer to today, we have Montero from Lil Nas X, which is both satanic and homosexual. Montero, of course, was this enormous song, was previewed in a Super Bowl as American as apple pie, Super Bowl commercial in February 2021. The song is noted for its queer themes, including its sexually explicit homosexual lyrics, taking its name from the 2017 film Call Me By Your Name, which centers on a gay romance. The campy, sexually charged music video for the song depicts Lil Nas X in a number of biblically inspired scenes, including the artist riding a stripper pole to hell and giving a lap dance to Satan. Yeah. The snake seduces Adam using its third eye, and the two kiss. I don't want to describe any more of this, but the reaction to Montero seemed to be, transgressive. Also, black means the same as gay, or what are these people making a fuss about? Satanism. Oh, boring. Really? Is it really that boring when people claim that they have access to, occult information and power? This is from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. A non-binary associate professor at Old Dominion University has called for the stigma of pedophilia to be delegitimized. Yes, really. The Prostasia Foundation. Prostasia. Doesn't that sound like something wrong in a man's, intestinal area? The Prostasia Foundation, a registered 503c, which has called for childlike sex dolls to be legalized, posted an interview with Alan, Allyn, because none of these people ever have normal names. Alan Walker, a female-to-male transgender, who outlined her views on minor attraction. Walker insists that the term minor attracted people should be used in preference to pedophile because pedophiles' feelings might be hurt otherwise. Quote, I think we believe societally that stigma against MAPS serves to protect children because we don't fully understand the differences between MAPS and sex offenders. Again, we have this confusion between the attraction and criminal behavior, and there's a picture of this woman who has, a beard, who does not look at all like a woman. Like, this is the lowest effort perhaps I've ever seen. This no long hair. There's no lipstick. Yes. Okay. Oh, although I'm not a map myself, okay, I'll have to take you at your word, Alan. I am queer, and so I too have been through experiences and realize I have attractions many people wouldn't understand and that some people might find immoral. And those experiences have really shaped who I've become. And so I sort of empathize with those experiences, and I wanted to learn more. This is a college professor who says things like, I sort of empathize with those experiences. Well, now you're beginning to understand, dear viewers and listeners, what love is love means. It is a universal injunction, and don't let anyone tell you different. Oh, and yeah, Mean Girls. Mean Girls is trending today because something strange happened. Not strange in Hollywood, but perhaps strange to people who aren't familiar with Hollywood. All the guys from Mean Girls are gay now, and here's what they look like, as they should be, to be honest. This is from BuzzFeed. Someone said to me, you know, the entirety of BuzzFeed could be written by Frog Twitter, and who would be able to tell the difference? Oh, according to this Matt Stopera, Mean Girls raised an entire generation of homosexuals. Like, really, find me a gay person who doesn't love that. Yeah, it's grooming. What do you mean grooming? There's no such thing as grooming in Hollywood. And with that in mind, let's look at Glee. You remember Glee? Perhaps one of the most hated television shows of all time. Haven't? You should watch the Community parody of Glee, which is absolutely hilarious. Glee ran from 2009 to 2015. And of course, it's about a Glee club because we all love mashups, right? Right? And bad things have happened to the cast of Glee. Maybe, I don't know, maybe we could look into Ryan Murphy, you know, just a suggestion. This is a piece from thethings.com, proof that there might actually be a Glee cast curse. Heather Morris, her nude photos got leaked. Melissa Benoist, her domestic violence claims against Blake Jenner. Chris Colfer, dealing with being typecast in Hollywood. Kevin McHale revealed his sexual exploits on Twitter, causing an upset with X Factor. Darren Criss was called out for making problematic comments about his own heritage. Diana Agron feuded with producer Ryan Murphy. Leah Michelle exposed for bullying on set and got canceled in 2020. Mark Salling caught with inappropriate content of minors and ended his own life. Naya Rivera tragically passed away in 2020. This is pretty much obviously a suicide. Oh, and there's Corey Monteith, tragically passed away from an overdose in July 2013. This show is just, it's horrifying to behold. What has happened to the people. And of course, there's still that maintain that apparently there were some heterosexual males involved in this. I don't think so. But again, grooming? Why would you use that word grooming? There's no such thing as grooming in Hollywood. And before I move to the book club, I am going to have a look at the chat. Before I go there, and just let me open some things here. And okay, let's get to it. The chat, that is. Charles Nuno. Hello, Charles. How you doing? Love is their most disgusting phrase. It makes me hate that four-letter word so false. How persist the last poets had a few bops. Quachalango says, KMG, don't you just hate being called hate just for having been born hot? What? Eh? Chogokin666, just for your visual education, look up Chase Strangio of the ACLU. Okay, well, I can't resist that. Bear with me here. Chase. What kind of people are called Chase? Okay. How old is this person supposed to be? Okay. Stigmatization, stereotypes. I suppose there wouldn't be so much stigmatization and, stereotype having if people didn't go out of their way to make themselves look like stereotypes who are going to be stigmatized. What else do we have here? Eric Roberts says Satan in the Killer's Mr. Brightside video is good because they don't beat you over the head with his being the devil. Okay. Rodion Raskolnikov says, good night, friends. Good night, KMG. Keep your kids long away from this stuff, says Quacholango. Yes, indeed. Brandon Smith says, almost everything in pop culture has satanic undertones. The Satanic Undertones, worst Irish tribute band ever. The occult recruitment trick is to train people to lust after power, which strengthens theirs by taking yours. I was going to mention this a little later, but I've worked in libraries for 15 years of my life, and I spent 3 years working for the Richmond School Board, which is just across the Fraser River from Vancouver. And part of my job was to set up turnkey systems, computer systems, after the holdings of the libraries had been digitized. And the other part of my job was cataloging books for elementary schools. And I discovered to my horror, this was in the late 80s, that an enormous number of these books for children were about the occult. Oh, and the forces of the devil win. With Goosebumps, is that Stein? Is that R.L. Stein? This Goosebumps series is absolutely horrifying. It just, oh yes, let's expose our children to satanic, demonic themes because it's fun. It's just good fun, Ayn Rand says, I'm sure Kevin likes Public Enemies 911 as a joke. Is that rap? Dionysa said, I used to like Marilyn Manson when I was a teenager. I just thought it was fun and games. Your mama says, is Robert Kardashian spinning in his grave? Okay, hello to British American. Gamian says, occult signs are everywhere in Hollywood music videos, for example, if you know what to look for. I'm sure that there's a lot of these people who put it in because, it's put to them, or they think, there's a certain subset of people who go crazy about this and they tend to be super fans. So if we put this stuff in our material, we'll get this fanatically loyal group of fans. I mean, we don't believe in it ourselves. I'm sure there's a lot of that. I'm sure there is a lot of that. Oh, yes. Ashley Main Bravo brings up that woman, that Slavic woman with the spirit cooking, who seemed to, Marina Abramovich, who seemed to be very well connected to Microsoft and the Democratic Party. A symbolic representation, of cannibalism, and the ingestion of certain fluids. Similarly, okay, let's talk about something happier now, which is one of the greatest books ever written. It's called Treasure Island, and it's by Robert Louis Stevenson. Stevenson had a short life of 44 years. He was born in 1850, and he died in 1894. One would have to say that his level of production was Stakhanovite. Besides Treasure Island, he wrote other classics: The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Kidnapped, A Child's Garden of Verses, and many, many, many other works and short stories. And he was tubercular, consumptive. It's been pointed out if he hadn't been unhealthy, he likely would have gone into the family business instead of becoming an author. And so we would have been cheated of his great works. Stevenson traveled the world, or a large part of the world, in search of climates that would be better for him than cold and chilly Edinburgh. And he ended up in the South Seas. And we see a lot of his traveling as represented in Treasure Island. Treasure Island was originally serialized from 1881 to 1882 in a book for boys called Young Folks. Now, I seem that there are quite a few adults, people who have graduated high school, maybe even have BA degrees, who would have a tough time with Treasure Island because we're stupider and more ignorant than we were, 140 years ago. How can there be any question about that? Treasure Island was published, collected by Castle in 1883, and it was a sensation, an absolute sensation. I come across a book here, a chapter about Stevenson, and gives you an idea of how popular this was. Turns out that since 1880, William Gladstone had been MP for Midlothian, including Swanston, Louis's father, as a confirmed Tory. Robert RLS's friends called him Louis, had long despised the man for his defection to the Liberals and could not forgive him for the national humiliation of the fall of Khartoum with the death of General Gordon. Louis also regarded Gladstone as a humbug, and in 1884 he'd been mortified to learn he was a great lover of his work. Quote, "It appears Gladstone talks all the time about Treasure Island. He would do better to attend to the imperial affairs of England." Unquote. That is strange to me. If the Prime Minister of England, who was known to be a voracious reader, which Gladstone was, he read several books a week while he was Prime Minister, is going everywhere talking up your novel, well, that has to be a good thing, doesn't it? I'm reminded of this fellow, what's his name, Jonathan Franzen, who, I think that's his name, who wrote The Corrections. And it was selected as a part of Oprah Winfrey's book club, and it became a runaway bestseller. Now, later, Oprah Winfrey asked to have lunch with Franzen, and Franzen was truculent about this. Does she think that I'm her servant or whatever? And I thought, if someone had put, I'm just going to guess here, $250,000 in my pocket, that would be, leaving aside film rights, I would feel well disposed to that person. Also, Oprah Winfrey is one of the most famous and influential people in America. She is a phenomenon, a worldwide phenomenon. Wouldn't a novelist, particularly a novelist of manners, be interested in meeting such a person? But again, novelists or writers are strange people. Treasure Island, well, I suppose everyone knows the story, or everyone knows parts of the story, but everyone might not know that it was this book that invented the pirate cult. We have Yo Ho Ho and a Bottle of Rum. We have talking parrots. We have men with peg legs. We have all of that we have, the spot is marked with an X. We have all of that from Treasure Island. And rereading this book, well, going back to what I was saying about cataloging children's literature, this is an absolutely thrilling book. It thrilled me as a child or an adolescent, and it continues to thrill me at the age of 66. Perhaps one could say that there is still a great deal of the boy in me, but I don't see anything wrong with that. It's really difficult to understand a large section of humanity if one has completely expelled the boy in the man. So when I read this book for the first time, and clearly this is the intention of the book, as an adolescent, I thought, would I be as brave, cunning, and resourceful and clever as Jim Hawkins is in this book? And the answer to that would have been, then as now, certainly not. But it is something to aspire to. Boys used to love to read stories about people who were not like them and places where they didn't live, particularly exotic places like the Caribbean. Young adult literature, as it's called now, is not like that at all. I don't know whether you know this or not, but it's now become commonplace in textbooks in the United States to remove references to oceans and to mountains, among other things. Why? Well, because certain children will have never have seen a mountain, certain children would have never have seen the ocean, and apparently this is going to give them a case of the SADS or something nastier. So, let's put blinders around children's heads so they won't be exposed to things that they don't know. The trend in children's literature today, and has been for quite some time, is let's write stories about what children are really like now. And I can only see this on these young adult writers. They're sadists. They're looking to make children as miserable as they are. Now, here's something to consider. Children are far more resilient than we typically give them credit for. And it is not unusual at all to see a child being, say, raised in a state that is objectively unpleasant or even worse, but they don't look at it that way. As explained before, there's several reasons for this. One, they are almost never responsible for their own misfortune. And two, their whole life is in front of them. Things will get better. Things will look up. I can do anything I want. Well, that's not true, but that's the way that people tend to think. Now, young adult writers, oh yes, let's concentrate on the misery. So let's here's a story about some fat 14-year-old boy, and he's being bullied, and of course he has this tremendous crush on the handsome popular boy in his class, but evil society won't let him express his sexuality, etc., etc., etc. I suppose this started with Judy Blume, but there are many, many thousands after her. There is nothing, again, this is an adult looking at the world with an adult's eyes, not a child looking at the world through a child's eyes or even an adolescent's eyes. And the secret to Treasure Island or to Kidnapped or David Balfour is they are written through the eyes of children or adolescents or young adults whose worldview perceptions are very different from, fully fledged and especially, embittered, sadistic adults who are determined to inflict their misery on people who yet might escape that world view. There is, of course, the book was serialized, and of course, every chapter must end with a cliffhanger. And of course, who was serialized? Well, Dostoevsky was serialized. Dickens was serialized. The first version of Bonfire of the Vanities was serialized in Rolling Stone magazine. And I'm thinking, maybe this was a good thing. Maybe we should go back to that. Maybe every chapter should end with a cliffhanger of one sort or another, because it certainly keeps you turning the pages. In terms of style, I will say this about Treasure Island and Robert Louis Stevenson. He is very good in describing flora and fauna. I normally find that sort of thing tedious in the extreme, but Stevenson manages to hold my attention when he takes considerable number of words to, let's say, to examine Hispaniola, the Treasure Island when it is first witnessed, and then the different parts of it, and the foliage and such like, and the places that have been denuded, by overforestation, etc., etc. And that's, to me, is quite an accomplishment. Now, this book was published in 1883, and its style is of a type which was already pretty much at the end or past its prime. That is to say, it is the style of previous years, the heavy foreshadowing. Here's how it came to be that I, etc., did this or that, or this happened to me. And again, most of the plot twists or the results, again, are stated beforehand. It's a very sort of archaic way, especially archaic to us now. To me, it just seems quaint. But keep in mind that the book is set in a very different world. 1883 was, near the peak of the Victorian era, when England, even a foul place like London, was tamed, civilized, and Britain was taming the whole world. The world that Treasure Island describes is a world of anarchy, pain, death, just of money. And how do you get money? Well, the best way to get money, not to work for it, but is to steal it. And there's a lot about money in this. And we learned that some of the pirates are actually investors, which is rather amusing indeed. But of course, we learn, and this is true to nature, that the type of man who is willing to, suffer great privation to travel, halfway around the world in search of money, which has to be taken by force, is not the sort of person to make long-term plans. That, drink it away, spend it on women, booze and the blow-ins, cops the lot, as Francois Villon famously wrote. And I like this here. Heard of him, cried the squire. That would be Squire Trelawney. Heard of him, you say? He was the bloodthirstiest buccaneer that sailed. Blackbeard was a child to Flint. The Spaniards were so prodigiously afraid of him that, I tell you, sir, I was sometimes proud he was an Englishman. I've seen his topsails with these eyes off Trinidad and the cowardly son of a rum puncheon that I sailed with put back. Put back, sir, and port of Spain. Well, I've heard of him myself in England, said the doctor. But the point is, had he the money? Money, cried the squire. Have you heard the story? Where were these villains after but money? What do they care for but money? For what would they risk their rascal carcasses but money? I love the rhythm there, how forceful that is. And it really makes its point. We see from the beginning of the novel that Jim Hawkins, he lives near Bristol, and Bristol, of course, one of the great trading ports of England. And Bristol was notoriously the great slave port of England. A rough place. But he is a few miles away, and his father owns an inn called the Admiral Benbow. And he has a wife and a son, and we learn very little about the father except that he is gravely ill. And near the beginning of the novel, he dies. And poor Jim is not really able to give the father's death, I don't know, the respect that it deserves, because there has been another death, a death at a guest at the inn. The captain, they call him, but later we learn he is called Billy Bones. And there is, in this novel, some of the most famous grotesques in literary history. Billy Bones and Blind Pew and Ben Gunn and Long John Silver. Long John Silver is one of the great characters in literature. Well, one reason being, not just because he's so fantastic, because that he's a multi-layered character, and he's rather a master of acting. Because we see that we see the various levels of intelligence in this novel. That we learned from the beginning that Dr. Livesey is a more intelligent man than Squire Trelawney. Squire Trelawney is a bit of blusterer. He's a bit of a boob, actually, and more to the point, he can't keep his mouth shut. But when we are introduced to Captain Smollett, and we see, you know, the growth of our understanding of this character is very impressive, because he makes a poor impression at the beginning. Well, he makes a poor impression because we're seeing him through the eyes of Jim Hawkins, and Hawkins is taking what he believes to be true about Smollett from what he understands to be the reactions of Dr. Livesey and Squire Trelawney. But Long John Silver has the great ability to be all things to all people. He has enough intelligence and he has enough control of himself that if he wants to impress a boy like Jim Hawkins and make Jim Hawkins his ally, he can do that. Of course, later we see that Hawkins is practically trembling with rage when he sees Long John Silver pull this act on another person, another young person. But Silver has had some education, and he can speak up and down to people at will. He can be commanding, he can be threatening, he can be deadly, but he can also be, well, obsequious, if that is what is necessary. And of course, that's what makes him a fully realized and formidable villain. If you, it's easy enough to get a hold of Treasure Island free. And you can get the complete works of Robert Louis Stevenson for a couple of bucks in a digitized form. But this sort of book is very pleasurable to read, you know, in hand. And I would recommend any edition that has the outstanding illustrations by N.C. Wyatt. And on Twitter, I included in my schedule for today, listing the topics. I put it there. One of the most famous illustrations, and it's about Mr. Hands. Not one step more, Mr. Hands, or I'll blow your brains out. A particularly thrilling scene. And of course, Treasure Island, it's a coming of age novel. We see how timorous Jim Hawkins is at the very beginning. But I suppose if there are lessons to be learned from this, is that bravery begets bravery, or fearlessness begets fearlessness, because we see that the scope of what Jim Hawkins is capable of is continually expanding throughout the novel. I have no hesitation in calling this one of the greatest books ever written, and I would certainly recommend it as reading material for all young people. Any clever boy, 10 years or older, should be able to handle it. And of course, if they have trouble with some of the words or expressions, then they could ask their parents, or perhaps look it up. Movies about a Treasure Island. There was a Disney movie starring Roger Newton, I believe from the 1950s. And Robert Newton he's really good as Long John Silver. Yes, this is 1950. It's a Disney movie. Bobby Driscoll is a wet rag as Jim Hawkins, and no, he seems sniveling throughout the movie. I cannot recommend that. The one that I like the best is the one. It was made for TV. I believe you can find it on video. I think it was made for TNT. And it is directed by Fraser Heston, who was the son of Charlton Heston. And it stars Charlton Heston as Long John Silver. And what a cast. Christian Bale, Oliver Reed, Christopher Lee, Pete Postlethwaite. That's the one that I would go for. So, once again, those are my thoughts on Treasure Island. And I feel, so I watched, I read, reading this, I just felt kind of, that the shackles had fallen off of me, that the oppression of the modern world, I could look back in a time when it was possible, for a boy to imagine the world and imagine taking it on, as I quoted David Mamet as saying yesterday, that it's thrilling then and thrilling now. Let's have a final look at the chat. Ashyman Bravo says he claims to have been inside the occult circles and present at the rituals of the globalist elite. He paints a picture similar to the Stanley Kubrick movie Eyes Wide Shut. Let's see. Disney made a movie semi-based on Jamaica Inn. Same idea, sand pirates, including shipwrecks. Earliest hitch I've seen is The Lodger, the silent based on Jack the Ripper, says Hauper. Yeah, pretty much. They're going further and further back with Hitchcock films, restoring them and bringing them out in Blu-ray. I mean, he made a whole bunch of movies which are just like cheap melodramas as he was learning his trade. I don't know, was Lodger the first good one? I'd have to give that some thought. Have you ever heard of the interview of a supposed international banker called Ronald Dutchman, called Ronald Bernard? I'm not sure how real his story is. Red Sulphur says, creepiest film I've seen is one called Begotten. Sounds of Dutch are a crime against the ear, says Red Sulphur. Look what Anthony Burgess says in one of his novels, that he was always marveling at Dutch names like Toon and Mass. Those are, Christian names. And it is kind of amusing. Of course, I'm sure they find our names amusing as well. It looks like Red Sulphur is not fond of the Dutch. Picasso 88 says, I'm getting Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas flashbacks. Red Sulphur says, Diary of a Country Priest under the Son of Satan. Those is George Bernanos. Diary of the Country Priest was filmed. And it's outstanding. Robert Bresson, Under the Son of Satan is one of the most frightening movies I have ever seen. It stars Gerard Depardieu as a priest, a young priest, and it is directed by the great French director Maurice Pilat, who was definitely undervalued on this continent. There are many French directors who are better known. They should be less known. This film won the Palme d'Or at Cannes in 1987, and there was booing when it was awarded. And Pilat was a famously pugnacious person, and he was shaking his fist triumphantly and swearing foully at the people who were booing him. That's a very funny story. At least to me, it's funny. Oh, we're talking about, what was his name? Marc Dutoit? Ashley Man Bravo, the cover-up and complicity by the state law enforcement was so vast that there were mass protests of hundreds of thousands of people in Brussels, Belgium. Yeah, that's something to bring up when people, conspiracy theories. Yeah, I want to talk about Belgium and how far up that went. Okay. I think... Has anyone seen French horror movie Martyrs? Pure evil, very disturbing, says Ogan's Iron. No, I haven't seen that one. Do you like the Stevenson painting? I don't know what that's a reference to. As I say, I included one of the Wyeth's illustrations when I was listing on Twitter what the topics of today's show are going to be. I think they're beautiful. And again, it's the sort of thing that would be thrilling to a boy, just as they're thrilling to me as an adult. Anyway, that's it for today and this week. What is coming up next week? On Music Monday, I'm going to be talking about Beck Hansen. I was listening to a bunch of his music, album tracks, B-sides, stuff he's done for other people. Just an enormously talented man. He's also gives great concert, very amusing in concert, having fun. Imagine that, having fun at his concerts. And on Theater Thursday, I'm going to be talking about a movie which I rewatched last Tuesday by Peter Brook from 1963 called Lord of the Flies. Of course, Lord of the Flies is being removed from school curricula because it's about white boys. And white boys are of no interest to anyone. Just as, why would we want to have our students read Treasure Island? It's about a bunch of white Englishmen who are not interesting at all and never accomplished anything in the world. And on the book club next week, another violent book, or a book about violence. It's by Graham Thompson. It's called I Shot a Man in Reno, and it's about, songs about murder and such like. So I will be back on the air Monday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, which, I've got 12 days to make my next month's rent, and things are looking very hairy, so this would be greatly, greatly appreciated. My PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. And if you are in Canada, donations to the live stream may be made directly via Interact at kevingrace.shaw. Kevin Grace. I always sort of come apart near the end of the show after 2 hours plus of this. What is it? kevingrace@shaw.ca. There we go. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly hope and wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.